So one of the more complicated applications of the principle of expectation damages comes up in the context of construction contracts, and that is what we're going to be talking about when we talk about the difference between diminution in value measure of damages versus the cost of correction. So if you remember the Groves and Wonder case, the basic formula that a party's expectation measure of damages is designed to put it in the position that it would have been in had the contract been fully performed is easy enough to state in the abstract, but the question is, well, what does that mean in practice, where you've got a situation where as in Groves and Wonder, where the cost of actually doing the reclamation work would far exceed any additional value that the land would have if it were properly reclaimed as required by the contract. And so the question becomes in Groves and Wonder, for example, well, when you compare those two things, cost of correction, which ends up being a big number, versus the diminution in value, which is a comparatively small number, which does the injured party get? And the concept that helps you figure out that question is the concept of economic waste. And so while the going in proposition is always going to be that the injured party is entitled to the cost of correction, or the cost of completing the unfinished work, in the case of simply unfinished work as opposed to defective work, the going in position is always that the party gets the cost of correction, the cost of diminution, or the cost of completing the unfinished work, because that's what will put the party in the position they would have been in had the contract been fully performed. If a homeowner says, I want this garage built, and the contractor does half the work and then abandons the project for whatever reason, the owner, you'd think, would get the cost of the excess cost of finishing. So if the garage was going to cost $10,000 and the owner has to end up paying $12,000 to get the whole thing done, the contractor should be liable for that extra $2,000 that it cost to put the owner in the position the owner would have been in had the contractor fully performed. Well, the rub comes when you've got a case like Groves and Wonder, where that cost of completion is way out of proportion to any diminution in value of the property as a result of the defective construction or the deficient construction. It could be unfinished. So, for example, if you think about the Reading pipe case, Jacob and Young's, where the house was built using one type of pipe when the specifications called for a different type of pipe, even though the two were functionally identical. In order to correct that defect, you'd have to rip out all the good pipe, perfectly good pipe, and reinstall other pipe that's also perfectly good, but just a different manufacturer's name stamped on it. Well, that cost of correction would be huge compared with the real difference in value to the homeowner of having the one pipe versus the other. And so the concept of economic waste comes in to say, okay, yes, it's generally true that an owner will get the cost of correction, but where that would amount to, quote, economic waste, where it would be economically wasteful to do that, such as, for example, where you're tearing out perfectly good pipe in order to reinstall pipe that's functionally equivalent, just a different brand. In that case, where the cost of correction would amount to economic waste, the owner simply gets the diminution in value. How much less is the house worth because it's got pipe number one versus what it would have been worth had it had pipe number two? In Jacob and Young's, the answer is probably nothing, right? There's no real difference in value. The house is just as valuable with the technically improper pipe as it would have been with the correct pipe. On the other hand, like Evan Groves and Wonder, where the cost of correction, or the cost of completion, doing the reclamation work, is a whole lot more than the diminution in value. It's a closer case, and so it's not always apparent exactly what amounts to economic waste and when that will defeat the effort to get the cost of correction. So it's just important to understand that you've got these two competing ways of looking at how do you put the injured party in the position it would have been in had the contract been fully performed. Do you look at the cost of correcting the deficiencies, or do you look at the overall economic impact that the deficiencies have on the value that the owner has received? And keeping in mind that the doctrine of economic waste is there to prevent sort of ridiculous outcomes like you'd have in Jacob and Young's, where you tear out good pipe to put in pipe that's not any better than what was in there already. Well, this same concept gets captured in the restatement in section 348, and it considers a variety of circumstances. It terms these alternatives to loss in value of performance, and we'll see what the restatement means by that in a second. But one possibility is, as subsection 1 indicates, if a breach delays the use of property and the loss in value is not proved with reasonable certainty, the owner, for example, may recover damages based on the rental value of the property or on interest on the value of the property. And what that's getting at is that where there's, for example, late construction, the construction is perfectly fine, it just has delayed the use of the property. One measure of damages could be the lost rental value of the property. That would be a way of approximating the damage to the owner. Okay, on the other hand, if we're not talking about delayed finish, but rather defective performance, we get in section 358.2 the whole Groves and Wonder or Jacob and Young's concept that, okay, you get diminution in value or cost of correction, okay, with the caveat that if that cost is not clearly proportionate to the probable loss in value. In other words, you have baked into subsection B the economic loss, or rather the economic waste doctrine, the idea that the injured party can get either the diminution value under 348.2a or the cost of completion or correction under 348.2b, unless 348.2b would result in economic waste. Now, the explanation for the title, Alternatives to Loss in Performance, Value of Performance, is in comment A here, which really just gets back to this whole concept that the injured party has to be able to prove its damages with reasonable certainty. And so what we see in those subsections, 348.1 and 2, are really examples of situations where the expectation damage measure may not be 100% clear how it applies. And so we get sort of specialized versions of the expectation measure in 348.1 through the lost rental concept, or through the in 348.2 the diminution in value or cost of correction measures. So the whole concept of how to apply the expectation measure of damages, while it sounds great in theory, is not always 100% easy to see how it works in practice, particularly in the context of construction contracts where you can have either delayed performance or defective performance. And the question then becomes, how do you make the injured party whole, give the injured party the benefit of its bargain without there being a windfall?